In the last episode, we looked at the very roots of video games with Alan Turing and his Turing test, games in their infancy with Ralph Baer and the Brown Box, and games as a sensation with the very first console wars in the golden age of arcades, before finally seeing games take a huge dive and just about die out altogether. Clearly, though, that's not what happened. In 1985, the Nintendo Entertainment System, known lovingly as the NES, came out in North America, along with the Duck Hunt / Super Mario Bros. Combo cartridge, another game called Gyromate, and a little masturbatory robot named Rob. Out of seemingly nowhere, Nintendo revitalized the entire game industry while simultaneously putting themselves and their plumber on the map so hard even they can't wipe themselves off these days, no matter how hard they seem to be trying. Nintendo did another new thing to bring back the industry and ultimately make it less soluble. They introduced third-party licensing. Now anyone could apply for Nintendo seal of approval, make a game, reap the profits without having to go out there and design their own console, and a lot of people did. A lot of people also didn't, but still made games for the NES anyway because, hey, free money. And again, because we can't have nice things without fighting over them, Nintendo also created the console war, referred to as the 8-bit war. The NES hilariously outpaced both the Sega Master System and the Atari 7800. Not bad for a company that used to sell collectible flower trading cards. 1985 saw a huge streak of releases backlog from the relatively successful 2 years that the NES's Japanese version, the Famicom, had been building up back home in the East. Games like Ice Climber, Excite Bike, Mach Rider, and Kung Fu, among several others, and from 1985 to 1994, when the console was retired, the NES would see its library expand to a staggering 785 titles, and that's just licensed ones. This included a number of games that would become a huge chunk of gaming's cultural foundation today. Zelda, Metroid, Final Fantasy, Contra, Metal Gear, and of course the Super Mario Bros., lest we somehow manage to forget them. 1984 saw the release of King's Quest, the first true adventure game as we know them today. The game would essentially be a graphical extension of the text-based adventure games like Zork, allowing for movement of the player character around and between screens and interaction with different aspects of the environment, even going behind certain 2D objects, creating a pseudo-3D illusion. LucasArts would later take this formula, remove the text-based messages, and run with it all the way to the bank until they decided to stop making fun games. King's Quest would go on to have many sequels, and even more fan-made sequels because, damn it, we weren't finished with it yet. Peter Molyneux founded Bullfrog Studios with Les Edgar in 1988 and somehow created the first god game ever, Populous, in 1989. Remember Molyneux, he'll be important later. Populous and other games he helped create at Bullfrog made him into one of gaming's first popular auteurs, with all the pros and pratfalls that come with it. Also in 1989, Nintendo released its Gameboy, and that was a big deal. For the first time, portable gaming was a thing. You didn't need a TV because, get this guys, the TV was in your pocket, so long as you had large enough pockets. The original Game Boy, as well as most of its subsequent versions, was designed by a Nintendo R&D guy by the name of Gunpei Yokoi, and so partly because of his design, partly because of Nintendo's at the time obsessive quality control, and partly because of the now rabid fanbase Nintendo had spent the last 4 years building up, the Game Boy, along with its subsequent redesigns and eventual color version, would not only outsell its one and only form of competition, the Sega Game Gear, but also the combined sales of the Game Gear, original NES, and both Sega Master System and Atari 7800 combined. It's a common mistake to jump right to the Super Nintendo as launching the game industry into the 16-bit era, but the Sega Genesis actually predated the SNES by 2 years, coming out in 1989. Likely because it had to compete with the Game Boy in the year of its release, the Genesis actually sold relatively well until 1991 when Sonic the Hedgehog came out to exchange blows with Nintendo's plumber, and this is actually pretty landmark. Not only did Sega hold its own, selling a mere 9.1 million units fewer than Nintendo, but the new mascot meant that consumers, meaning here mainly children whose console of choice was defined by what their parents got them for Christmas, were now genuinely arguing over which console was better. To the best of my knowledge, this was the first time the words console war were in popular use, and in fact is considered by somebody the first real console war, since it was the first generation where all parties, minus the oft-forgot TurboGrafx, were in such close, fierce competition. We also see the first signs of fanboys as we know them today, blindly defending their console with apparent disregard for any shortcomings because screw you guys, Sonic is way cooler! Games-wise, there was a lot of gold on both sides. Nintendo and Sega are both credited as making many of their masterpieces in this period, Mario et al. Standing out for Nintendo, with special attention to Super Metroid and Link to the Past being still considered by some to be the best in their respective series. And slightly more mature cool kid games piling the roster for Sega like Altered Beast, Phantasy Star, Splatterhouse, and of course, Sonic. You could even argue, though, it was a new golden age for gaming with all the classics that came out or were otherwise further polished by this generation. Like anything that gets crazy popular, though, there's also a massive flotsam detritus and other unspeakable miscellany floating around as well. Tie-in games became a big thing. They were always there, the aforementioned DT from Atari should tell you that. But with games as new and tapped and market for kids, everyone from Disney to Saturday morning TV shows, even Pizza Hut got in on the action with their own licensed games. Some were okay, most were awful, and even a few of them were pretty good, but by and large, this would be the start of a new trend that gamers fear and loathe this very day. Licensed games made quickly and cheaply, not to be good games in and of themselves, but to help promote whatever they were tying into. These days, the bar has risen slightly, and honestly, you don't really see as many tie-in games as you used to, but they do still occasionally happen, and they're usually very nearly a steaming pile of crap. And this is really probably where I should end this week's video. Part 2 is originally going to be much longer, covering the first national outrages about content and ending right before Sony entered the scene to shake things up with their PlayStation. But I continue to underestimate the amount of work that goes into making these videos, hence why I am once again a day late on my promised release. Be sure to come back next week where we cover all the stuff I wasn't able to get to this week. In the meantime, why not head over to our blog? Last week I did an article about bisexuality, and this Wednesday it's looking like I'm going to get to deconstruct Batman, which sounds like it would be a lot of fun if not for all the punching and broken bones. Until next time, I'm Tom and Under Review, and this has been part 2 of a brief, incomplete history of video games.